Okay, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a bio for Kristen, some of her highlights. Kristen was originally born and raised in Minnesota, or as she says, Southern Canada. She moved to Colorado 5 years ago to pursue her Master's of Divinity. She and her husband are avid coffee drinkers, get lost in the mountain, hikers, and game players. She's always had a passion for the written word, be it poetry, short story, or something else. So, Kristen, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. How are you guys doing? Good. Well, how many of you have had a chance to visit that dessert table in the back corner? Nice. That was the first place I went. And if any of you haven't already tried those little like hand heart pies, I would say you should try them, but I think I just ate all of them. Just kidding. I'm actually pregnant. In case you couldn't tell. A few weeks ago, I was chatting with one of my friends, and we were talking about pregnancy, and she was saying how much she loved being pregnant. Her favorite part was being able to feel the baby move for the first time. And all I could think to say in response was, uh-huh. Don't get me wrong, being able to feel the child move for the first, second, third, maybe even fourth time is pretty great. But then they get bigger. Now, are any of you fans of the Discovery Channel or like National Geographic or anything? So I used to love watching the documentaries. And one in particular stands out. I believe it was on crocodiles. And I remember how they would describe the crocodiles waiting in the water for however long it took for their prey to come down to the edge. And when they were least expecting it, the crocodile would lash out, latch on, and drag them to the depths, where they performed a spinning death roll. It was teeth and tail and limbs everywhere. Now, I don't know how this is possible, but I'm pretty sure my son has already seen this documentary. Now, over the course of my pregnancy, I've had several conversations with parents who have made similar remarks to each other. It goes something along the lines of describing their children as living pieces of their heart out walking around in the world. When they're overjoyed, so are the parents. When they're filled with sorrow, when they hurt, the parents hurt. And at first, I couldn't quite relate. And I'm sure I have plenty of years ahead of me of where I can relate. But a couple of weeks after, I had just gone through a routine gestational diabetes test, so much fun. And I was sitting in the cafe when I got the results. Now, I don't know what I'm looking at, but as I'm scrolling through the blood work, two things stood out to me as abnormal. So I, of course, did what everyone does and should never do. Dear Google, what does it mean when? Has anyone ever noticed how no matter what your symptoms are, the prognosis on WebMD is always the same? Paper cut, death. Headache, death. Swallowed my gum, death. Doesn't matter what it is, it always leads to death. And unfortunately, these two abnormalities also led to death. Only it wasn't my death, but the death of my child. And when I read the words infant mortality on WebMD, there was a piece of my heart that started to break. It was the first time I began to realize how much this little guy was already loved. This little man who has yet to do anything right or wrong, whose eyes I have yet to look into, and whose hand I have yet to hold, was already deeply and irrevocably loved. Now, for anyone asking the unanswered question, both mom and baby are fine. WebMD is a liar, don't listen to it. But it was the first time that I experienced my own mother's heart breaking. But it wasn't the first time I had experienced the breaking of a mother's heart. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to go to Israel and study abroad for a few weeks. Part of my courses at Denver Seminary. Highly recommend it. And while I was there, we had the opportunity to go to Yad Vashem. Translated, Yad Vashem means a name and a place. Two things that are of great importance to the Jewish people that was stripped from them during the Holocaust. Now, aside from memorializing what happened during World War II, the Holocaust Memorial, the building itself was built in such a way to tell its own story. When you first get there, you notice there's these giant cement slabs that are angled in towards each other, forming a triangular tunnel. It was created to look like a scar, representing the Holocaust as a scar upon humanity. When I first walked in, I was struck by two things immediately. The first was how incredibly dark it was. The second was how with every step I took, I got further and further into that darkness. Now, if you're thinking of this building as a long tunnel, it has one main drag. It's a path about 6 feet wide going down the center of the memorial. And it angles downward till you hit about halfway and then starts going back up. At the very end is the whole wall is a window overlooking the Jezreel Valley. While up above, the very tip of the triangle is a skylight. It was meant to represent the ever-present hope the Jews had during the Holocaust of making it to Israel. Now, the thing was, you didn't just walk down the path and walk back up, but you had a series of ropes that led you off into the wings, back and forth across this main path. It wasn't a straight shot. And at first, it wasn't so bad. I was like, okay, I can do this. We're just watching some photos and some videos about Hitler coming to power, not so bad yet. And then you start to get into the deportations. And then you start hearing firsthand accounts. And then you hear the torture methods. And eventually, you see pictures of bodies being bulldozed. It was about then that I began to break. And I was maybe halfway through. All I wanted to do was run straight up that path and out that door, but I couldn't. Just like the Jews, in a very small symbolic way, you were forced to continue the journey. Finally, I did make it to the end, and as I burst out into the sunshine trying to breathe, I came face to face with the Children's Memorial. Now, this is a memorial made up of several stone slabs. In my brain, they were about 8 feet tall. And on each one was the name of every child that was murdered during the Holocaust, totaling 1.5 million. Now, for those of you who work a regular 8-hour job, 9 to 5, Monday to Wednesday, if your sole task was to read every single name on that memorial, it would take you over 10 days to read all of them. At this point, I was completely numbed. I didn't know how to process anything that I had just witnessed, and I was trying so hard to hold it together. Somehow, I made my way over to what they called the Garden of the Righteous, which was an area where they planted an olive tree for every single person that stood against Hitler in a significant way. In my mind, it's far too small. But I sat there underneath an olive tree, and I remember hearing the birds sing and feeling the sun shine, wondering how life could go on after all that I had just seen. And I sat there trying to pray, but I couldn't get past, dear God. And a couple of moments later, I really felt the Lord lean down close to me and say, Kristen, it's okay that you don't have words, because right now, I've just given you my tears to cry. Now, growing up in the church, we often hear God referred to as our Heavenly Father, which is a beautiful name for him. However, in that moment, I believe I witnessed his mother's heart. Each one of those Jews, then and now, each one of us here tonight, is a living piece of God's heart walking around in the world. No matter what we've done, whether good or bad, right or wrong, each one of us moves the very heart of God. So for those of you sitting here tonight, I just want to let you know that no matter what shame or beauty you walked in here with, you are deeply and irreversibly loved and adored by our Father.